Bimbo returned home from school, puzzled at who she saw in school that day. Their maid's daughter, Tife, resumed at her school that morning, and Bimbo could not stand the fact that she was attending the same school with her maid's daughter. She approached her mother, Simi, who could not understand how her maid BC was able to afford the exorbitant fees of the school. "Are you sure BC has not been stealing from me?" she asked her daughter, who stared at her blankly and watched as she yelled out for the maid, who ran out to meet her madam on hearing her name.
"How and why is your daughter Tife enrolled in my daughter's school?"
BC stood there confused as her heart began to race. She finally summoned the courage to tell her madam that her daughter Tife was chosen to attend the school on scholarship. An individual who preferred to remain anonymous decided to sponsor her daughter in the school, paying all her fees upfront. She told her madam that she was so shocked to hear the news, as the school contacted her to reveal that her daughter's fees up till the day of her graduation had been paid in full by the anonymous sponsor. Bimbo and her mother were stunned to hear this. "How can my maid's daughter attend the same school as my own daughter?" Simi screamed out angrily as she made up her mind to get to the root of the matter. The next morning, Simi visited the school to see the school principal, who happened to be her friend. She voiced her concerns, trying to know who this scholarship sponsor was and if it was possible for the school to refuse the sponsorship and send Tife out of their school. But the principal revealed to her that the information she sought was above her pay grade, as only the owner of the school knew who this anonymous sponsor was. She revealed that all payments and arrangements were made through the owner of the school, and Bimbo's mother, on hearing this, knew that it would be so difficult to get this information from just anyone. She pleaded with the principal to transfer BC's daughter to a less expensive school nearby, as she could not tolerate the idea of her maid's daughter attending the same school as her daughter, and the principal, shocked to hear her request, replied her saying that she had no power to grant such a request, as only the owner of the school or the parent of the child can request for such a transfer. Simi, feeling so disappointed, returned home agitated as she thought of what else to do. "I should talk to Tayo at the office," she thought to herself, as she remembered that Tayo had a close relationship with the CEO of their company, who happened to also be the owner of her daughter's school. She arrived at the office the next day and spoke to Tayo, who revealed to her that their CEO had traveled and was scheduled to return in 3 months to announce their promotion. Simi was so excited to hear this because she had waited for this promotion for a very long time. The death of their former CEO put a halt to the whole process, and now, with the new CEO in place, things were finally moving forward. However, with the brewing case of her maid's daughter attending her daughter's school, Simi had to act fast before people got to know about the situation. She returned home and could not stop thinking about what people would say if they found out that their maid's daughter was now in her daughter's school. Simi enrolled her daughter in the prestigious school as a way of showing off her wealth to her friends, who envied her and strived to be like her. Now, with her maid's daughter attending the same school, Simi believes that her social standing was now threatened. How can she boast of her status when her maid's daughter was in the same class as her own child? Simi's thoughts spiraled as she became more determined to resolve the situation. She called BC to her room and offered to pay for her daughter's fees in a less expensive school in the village, promising to also give BC a huge amount of money that she could use to sustain her life. But BC seemed not to be interested in her offer. She respectfully told Simi that the school was her daughter's dream school and that her daughter looked forward to be considered for the yearly overseas scholarship that the school offered to its selected students. She pleaded with Simi to allow her daughter study at the school, promising that Tife would not be a bother to anyone, but Simi insisted that her daughter cannot be in the same school as her maid's daughter. She told BC to withdraw her daughter from the school or face her wrath, and BC left her presence confused as to what to do. How can I squash my daughter's dream even before it has begun? BC spent her night deep in thoughts. Her heart was so heavy with worry as she could not stand hurting her own daughter, who had spent years praying for an opportunity like this. The next morning, as Tife dressed up for school, her mother BC called her to the side to explain all that was happening. Simi is not happy with the idea of you attending the same school as Bimbo. She wants me to move you to another school and has promised to pay all your fees upfront, she said to Tife, who now had a frown on her face.
How about the scholarship, Mama?
Tife asked her mother, who stood there confused as she had no answer for her daughter.
Mother, this scholarship is my dream. Please don't let them take it away from me,
Tife said as she cried out to her mother, who could feel the pain in her daughter's heart. Tife stood there confused, unsure of if she should go to school or not. Her mother, seeing her fully dressed in her uniform, struggled to make a decision. Go to school, she said to Tife, whose eyes lit in joy as she rushed out of the house excitedly. BC arrived Simi's home and was confronted by Simi, who asked what her decision was, and BC, with tears in her eyes, pleaded with Simi not to squash her daughter's dream.
It is all she has. Please don't take it away from her,
BC said to her boss, who was not willing to listen to her. BC had never seen Simi so angry in her entire life. She spent the whole day thinking, worried about what the next day would bring. She knew that her daughter's future was on the line and had to find a way to protect it. The next morning, Simi called BC into her room again. Her face was stern as she spoke to BC in a very cold tone. I have made my decision, she said to BC, who she gave the option of withdrawing her daughter from the school or leaving her house forever. She even went further to threaten BC, saying that she would do everything within her power to ensure that BC never got a job around if she decides to go against her wish by leaving her daughter in the school. BC's heart sank. She had worked for Simi for almost a year and knew what Simi was capable of doing. She could not afford losing her job because it was her only means of livelihood. Now, she found herself torn between risking it all or succumbing to the pressures of her madam, who she knew would stop at nothing to see that Tife leaves her daughter's school.
Madam, please,
BC pleaded.
Tife has worked so hard for this opportunity. She deserves a chance at a better future.
Simi's expression did not change. She told BC that she had until the end of the week to make her decision. As the days went by, BC searched desperately for a solution. She spoke to her daughter about it, and Tife, seeing how serious the situation had gotten, agreed to take up Simi's offer to change her school. This was a huge sacrifice that she was willing to make, as Tife could not stand and watch her mother's life turn to ruins. So, she decided to sacrifice her scholarship dream to make sure that her mother's life was not ruined. BC, however, decided to wait till the end of the week before informing Simi of her decision. She had no inkling why, but her resolve was so strong. Tife arrived school that morning and sat on her desk when Bimbo and her friends walked in to harass her. Look who we have here, Bimbo said mockingly. The maid's daughter thinks she belongs here, she continued as she laughed aloud with her friends. Tife looked up, trying to remain calm. I'm just here to study, Bimbo. Please leave me alone. Leave you alone? Bimbo laughed mockingly. Why should I leave you alone when you do not belong here? Tife, this is not your place. Why don't you go back to where you belong with the other poor kids? She said to Tife as her friends joined in, taunting Tife further. They made fun of her clothes and even poured her lunch on her uniform as they all laughed and called her a pig, making a grunting sound. Tife felt tears pour down her eyes. She stood up, gathered her things and walked out of the classroom, feeling so humiliated as Bimbo's friend continued to grunt like a pig and laugh. The bullying continued over the coming days as Bimbo utilized every opportunity to humiliate Tife. She pushed Tife into a puddle of water in front of the school, soiling her entire uniform. She even went as far as flushing Tife's books in the school toilet. Bimbo did everything within her power to make Tife's life miserable, but this did not deter Tife, who decided never to allow Bimbo's actions to break her spirit. Instead, Tife decided within herself to remain strong and focused on that which is important. Meanwhile, the day finally arrived when Bisi was mandated to inform Simi of her decision. She stood there, lost in her own thoughts, when Simi's husband, Chief Folarin, walked in on her in the living room and noticed how absent-minded she looked. He had just returned home and was shocked to see her worried. "Why do you look troubled?" he asked Bisi, who could not bring herself to tell him all that was happening. Bisi feared what her madam would do to her if she realized that she had such a discussion with her husband. Chief Folarin was a very wealthy man who lived with his first wife, Madam Ayo. He did not live permanently with Simi because she was his second wife, but he visited her at intervals and spent a few days with her. He was such a powerful and influential man, and Simi ensured that she was of her best behavior whenever he was around. Bisi, knowing all this, pretended to be fine, wearing a huge smile on her face as Chief Folarin instructed her to tell his driver to go pick something up from his office. A few minutes later, Simi returned home and met Bisi. She asked what her decision was, and Bisi fell to the ground and pleaded with her to be more considerate. But Simi informed her that she would never allow their daughters to attend the same school. She yelled angrily and told Bisi that if she was not ready to bend to her demands, she should leave her house immediately and never return to work. Just as she was yelling, her husband Chief Folarin, who was sitting in the adjoining room, overheard their conversation and quickly understood what was going on. He walked in on them, looking so disappointed at his wife as he said to her that if she cannot allow their daughter to attend the same school as Bisi's daughter, then she should consider changing their daughter's school. "What is wrong with Bisi's daughter attending the same school as our daughter?" he asked his wife, who stammered for a few seconds, unable to give a viable answer. She was so shocked to see him in their home as she had no idea that he was around. "When did you arrive?" she asked her husband, who repeated his question again, asking her why she found it appropriate to mandate their maid to withdraw her daughter from the school. Simi's face was now filled with regret as she stammered,
It's not appropriate. People will talk."
Chief Folarin shook his head in disappointment. "This is not about what people will say. It's about giving every child an equal opportunity to succeed. If Bisi's daughter earned a scholarship, she deserves to be there. I will not tolerate such prejudice in my home ever again," he said angrily to his wife. Realizing that she had no choice but to comply, Simi nodded reluctantly. Turning to Bisi, Chief Folarin spoke up saying, "Bisi, your daughter will remain in that school. If there are any issues, you come directly to me. No one will mistreat you or your daughter under my watch," he said as tears of relief welled up in Bisi's eyes. "Thank you, Chief. Thank you so much," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Chief Folarin nodded as he left their presence, leaving Simi to reflect on her actions. She knew that she had no choice but to accept her husband's decision, and this infuriated her greatly, as her heart was now filled with so much bitterness for Bisi. The next morning, once Chief Folarin left for work, Simi called Bisi to her room and accused her of trying to break her marriage.
"I know your plans. You want to cause confusion between my husband and I, so that you will replace me as Chief's next wife, Abi?"
she said to Bisi, who pleaded with her saying that she never had such intentions.
"Is Chief your secret sponsor?"
she asked Bisi, who told her that she had no idea who her secret sponsor was.
You expect me to believe you?
She said to BC as she accused her of using her tricks to worm her way into her husband's life. BC could not believe her ears. She told Simi that she would never do such a thing.
My only concern is my daughter's education.
BC said as Simi's eyes filled with rage.
You think I am a fool? Well, let me make one thing clear to you. Stay out of my way and keep your distance from my husband.
Simi said to BC as she walked out of the house angrily to meet a man who had just come to deliver a letter. She looked closely at the letter and realized that it had her name written boldly on it. She quickly opened the letter and saw that it was from the school, who informed her that she had been chosen to head the board in charge of assessing scholarship applications at the school. Simi could not believe her eyes. She was going to be in charge of choosing the students who would be granted the overseas scholarship, and the thought of this filled her with joy. Now, let's see how Tife will be chosen for this scholarship, she said to herself as she let out a wicked laugh. She arrived at the office a few minutes later and was told that the CEO had sent a representative to interview the candidates for promotion. However, only one candidate will be chosen to replace the outgoing managing director who was recently convicted of embezzlement. Simi was so determined to secure the promotion as it would not only elevate her status in the society but also make her acquainted with the CEO of the company, who happens to also be the owner of her daughter's school. Simi was so determined to achieve her goal of expelling Tife from the school to teach BC a bitter lesson. So, she explored every possible avenue to ensure that Tife would not only be removed from the school, but also be prevented from securing the overseas scholarship. Tife, unaware of the brewing plans, sat in school when she heard the applications were now open for the overseas scholarship. She was so excited and rushed quickly to procure the form from the school principal. She read the requirements and realized that she had to write an essay on a certain topic, and this filled her with joy because she looked forward to the challenge ahead. She arrived home, but her mother had still not returned from work. Tife sat in her room as she began to write her essay, fantasizing on how she would be selected and how her life overseas would be. She could not wait for her mother to return to tell her all about the scholarship application. Meanwhile, Simi, sitting in her home, called out her daughter Bimbo to ask if she had picked up the scholarship form, but Bimbo did not seem interested in applying for the scholarship because she dreaded the thought of writing the essay. She was so dull in school and struggled with her studies, but her mother Simi insisted that she must apply for the scholarship as she could not allow Tife to outshine her, especially when she was the head of the scholarship board. Bimbo, hearing the seriousness in her mother's voice, agreed to pick up the form the next morning. She knew that she had no choice but to comply with her mother's desires if she wanted to live in peace in their home. Tife, however, was still engrossed in her essay, pouring out her heart into every word that she wrote. She knew this was her chance to achieve her dream, and she was determined to give it her best shot. When BC finally returned from work, Tife excitedly told her about the scholarship application and the essay. She looked so excited as she explained her essay to her mother, who stood there and watched her in admiration. Days turned into weeks, and the deadline for the scholarship application was already around the corner. It was a day to the deadline, and Tife was returning home from school when some street boys attacked her and snatched her bag. She returned home in tears. Her scholarship essay, which she spent weeks to prepare, was inside the stolen bag, and Tife panicked as the deadline for submission was only a few hours away. What she did not know was that Simi was the one behind the attack. Simi sat in her living room, excited to finally receive Tife's essay. She could not risk Tife handing in her essay the next morning. She sat there happy as she watched her plans materialize before her eyes. With this, I'm sure that Ife would have no other reason to remain in the school, she said as she smiled to herself, feeling so fulfilled and excited. She called her daughter Bimbo to ask how her scholarship essay was going and noticed that Bimbo had barely written past the first line. Take this essay and rewrite it with your own handwriting, Timi said to her daughter Bimbo as she handed Tife's essay to her. Bimbo, though hesitant, complied with her mother's request. She knew the consequences of disobeying her mother and reluctantly copied the essay in her handwriting. The next morning, Bimbo submitted the essay to the principal as her own. She arrived class and noticed that Ife did not show up at school. Even their maid Bisi stopped showing up at their home, and Simi was so delighted to have finally actualized her plan. In school, however, many believed that Ife had dropped out of school because her scholarship essay was stolen. The students all laughed at her, saying that Ife made up the story to cover her shame of not being able to apply for the scholarship that she had raved about for a while. Bimbo joined them to laugh and tease Tife, even when she knew that it was Tife's essay that she submitted and not her own. However, that did not matter, as Tife was no longer in their school. The scholarship board reviewed all the essays, and as expected, Bimbo was selected as one of the winners of the overseas scholarship. She was so overjoyed as she could not believe it. All her friends envied her as they could not believe that Bimbo would be studying abroad soon. However, something unexpected happened as Bimbo and the other winners were informed that they had to defend their essays before being awarded the scholarship. The news sent a wave of panic through Bimbo, who knew that she couldn't defend Tife's work. Her mother Simi, oblivious of the newest development, was home celebrating her daughter's scholarship award when Bimbo returned home to tell her mother of the new requirement. Simi froze in shock on hearing this. Do you still have the original essay? She asked Bimbo, who informed her that she threw the essay in the trash. Panicking, they ran out to search the trash, but noticed that their trash bin had already been emptied. Simi and Bimbo could not believe how things were suddenly spiraling out of control. The defense of the essay was scheduled for the next day, and they had no way of preparing. Bimbo was on the verge of tears, and Simi's heart raced with desperation. The following morning, the school was abuzz with anticipation as the scholarship candidates gathered to defend their essays. Bimbo, feeling sick with worry, took her place among them. She watched as other students confidently presented their work, answering questions with ease as her heart began to beat through her chest. Her turn finally came, and she stepped forward, trembling in fear. As Bimbo began to speak, everyone listened as she tried her best to remember the little she could remember from the essay. Time now came for her to answer questions about her essay, and the examiners threw the first question at her, but Bimbo had no idea what the answer was. They asked the second question, and Bimbo stood there mute as everyone stared at her in disbelief and wondered why she couldn't answer the questions. The examiners looked at themselves confused as they sensed that something was clearly wrong. Her mother, sitting in the distance, could not help but bury her head in shame. She never believed that her wicked plan would backfire in such an embarrassing way. As Bimbo stood there confused, Tife walked into the room with her mother Bisi. Simi's eyes shone in shock as she never expected to see them there. Her heart raced as she feared what they would do, knowing that her daughter submitted Tife's essay. She sat there, hoping that the ground would open up and swallow her, when the school principal came forward to introduce Bisi to them all as the owner of the school. Simi could not believe what she was hearing. Bisi, the woman who had worked for her as a maid for a few months, was the owner of her daughter's school, as well as her boss, the CEO of the company that she worked for. Simi's face turned pale as Bisi went on to reveal that the essay that Bimbo submitted for the scholarship actually belonged to her daughter Tife, whose essay was stolen from her a day before the submission. She told the people that she had been working for Simi as her maid for months to assess her character to see if she was the best fit for the MD position at her company after the last MD embezzled the company's money, leading to the death of her father, who died of the shock. She decided to be meticulous in choosing the next MD. Simi came highly recommended, and BC, unwilling to repeat the mistakes that her father made, decided to go undercover with her daughter to work as a maid for a few months to get to know Simi a whole lot better. She knew that people were capable of hiding their terrible character in public. However, hiding one's true character in private is not so easy, especially around people who they believe cannot do anything for them. So, I enrolled my daughter Tife in my own school to see how you would react, knowing that your maid's daughter was now attending your daughter's school. The way you treated my daughter Tife and the lengths you are willing to go just to prevent Tife from attending the same school as Bimbo showed me the kind of person that you are. One who is easily intoxicated by power and not afraid to oppress those around you. Then came the scholarship application, which I made you the leader of the board to see how you would handle the application process. Tife returned home that evening and informed me that her bag had been stolen. My mind convinced me that you had a hand in the theft, but I decided to give you a benefit of the doubt, hoping that you would prove me wrong. But this was not the case, as not only did you steal my daughter's scholarship application, you went ahead to give it to your own daughter Bimbo to submit as her own. This showed me how dubious you are, and at this point, I am glad that you revealed your true colors to me, because this has saved not only myself, but my company and school from dubious people like yourself. The whole room fell silent as Bisi's words sank in like stone. Simi, unable to process what had just happened, hid her face in shame as the people stared at her blankly in disbelief. She glanced at her daughter Bimbo, who stood next to her equally mortified as they both regretted their actions. They could not believe who Bisi and Tife were and wished they treated them better. Bimbo, feeling the weight of her actions, approached Tife to apologize for how badly she treated her and for stealing her essay, and Tife accepted her apology and advised her to change her ways. Simi, realizing the consequences of her behavior, approached Bisi to apologize for allowing her pride and prejudice to blind her sense of compassion and fairness. I understand if you can't forgive me, but I am deeply sorry, Simi said as her voice trembled, and Bisi, maintaining her composure, nodded as she said to Simi that she was happy that she recognized her mistakes. However, she should remember that forgiveness is a process that starts with genuine change. I hope you will learn from this experience and treat others with more respect and kindness in the future, Bisi said as she walked out of their presence with her daughter Tife. That was how Simi and her daughter learned their lesson and began to treat people with respect. Simi, however, lost the promotion opportunity as one of her other colleagues got promoted instead. So, she spent her time working to rebuild her reputation as well as her relationship with others. Tife and her mother, however, resumed their lives as Tife continued with her school, whilst her mother Bisi took up her position as the CEO as she led the people with compassion and fairness. The lesson to be learned from this story is that you should treat everyone with kindness and respect. Do not look down on people or feel anyone is less than you and not deserving of the things that you desire. Be kind to those around you and be cautious of the things you say or do to them. Spread love wherever you go and treat people the way you would like to be treated, as only then would we live in a peaceful world. Lastly, do not covet that which belongs to others, as covetousness can lead to destructive actions that harm both others and oneself. The narrative teaches the importance of integrity, fairness, and humility. It highlights the dire consequences of prejudice and deceit, showcasing how such behaviors can lead to one's downfall and ruin relationships and opportunities. I hope you enjoyed the story.